I'm going to turn it over to John, actually, at this point. And you can tell us how that happened. How'd that happen?
That's hilarious.
Want me to give you a line of credit?
I was completely unprepared for
Gives you a line
that.
of credit.
That's very...
Deserve it.
So I started talking to Len in April of 2008. Mindy and I were in London, and I got a call from a woman, Cindy Johansson, who was the co-founder of PBS.org with me, and she said, there's this museum in Silicon Valley, and I really, they're looking for someone, and I think you should talk to them. And I said, I don't know anything about museums, and I know a little about Silicon Valley because we'd done quite a bit with Intel and others when I was at PBS. And so I was a little hesitant, and she said, well, no, I think you should do this. And so one thing led to another, and I found out Len and Donna were coming to London on a vacation. So we had dinner in April of 2008, and I was prepared to listen politely and be very skeptical. But Len and Donna are very persuasive people, and they have such a passion for the museum. And I said to Mindy afterwards, I think this is pretty interesting, actually. So I came out, and I met Len in May of 2008. It was still raining in London. It was 75 and sunny here. That helped a lot. I saw the building. I saw visible storage. If you had never taken the personal Len Shustek guided tour of visible storage, you really missed out, because that was something to behold. And I went back to London, and I said, I think this is something we probably ought to do. And we'd thrown ourselves off a cliff once by moving from Washington to London. Why not try this too? But in all seriousness, what I saw was a chairman and a board with an unbelievable vision for what they wanted to do. They were continue to be incredibly both generous and fiscally responsible. They built a very strong institution with an endowment, a proven track record of fundraising. And more important than all of that, they understood that computing was probably the greatest single undertaking of human creativity in all of human history. And there was only one place where that story was going to be told, and it was going to be this museum. And I joke today that we're the only history museum in the world that has more future than it does history. And I thought, what an incredible challenge to undertake something like that. And with this board and this location and this facility and this vision, we can make it happen. The interesting thing was, though, as Len said, this exhibit was long dreamed of, but it was very much still on the drawing board. And the summer of 2008, when I arrived, I immediately set in motion a series of conversations about how we could make this real. And I remember driving up to Pescadero to meet with Len and Donna one Sunday afternoon there in the middle of that summer, and I said to Len, after having some discussions with the staff, I don't think we're thinking big enough. I think that this exhibit that is only designed to occupy half the available space needs to occupy all the available space. This is a big story. We have the collection and the storytelling ability to fill it up. We've got one shot to get this right. This is what Silicon Valley has been waiting for, and I think we need to go for it. Well, Len's eyes just lit up, and it took him about a nanosecond to say, yeah, I think you're right. I think we should do this. Now that summer, this is going to be just a bit of a story, but it's worth the telling, because it tells you a lot about the museum. That summer, the executive committee and finance committees of the board had decided not to meet in August for vacation reasons. So there were actually 2 meetings of the executive committee and the finance committee that September. On the Thursday after Labor Day, I think it was around the 5th or 6th of September, I walked in with what I wanted to be the new plan of record, and I had said to our head of exhibitions, I want a big plan, I want a big map, I want to roll this thing out on the table and have everybody be able to get a good look at it. And so I did that, and one of the first comments was from a trustee, another trustee named Grant Seviers. This was a plan to double the size of the exhibit and increase the budget by about $6 million. And he looked at it and he said, did I miss a meeting? And they said, look, go for this and try to come back in 3 weeks when the second meeting of that September was going to happen and give us a plan and a budget. Well, in between, the stock market dropped about 975 points. And it was a real gut check to see whether we were going to step up and really try to build this exhibit. But the executive committee approved it, and the very next month was a board meeting. And we spent about the first 90 minutes of the board meeting discussing if we were going to cut the operating budget by some fantastic percentage because of the downturn. And finally, one trustee said, you know, John, as long as we know that you've got a bias toward paranoia, we're just going to let this thing kind of run the way it is. And I thought that was the greatest phrase ever, and I've learned that that is a really important thing to have. Then when the main agenda item came up, which was to double the size of the budget and the exhibit and increase the budget by $6 million, that took about 20 minutes, and the vote was unanimous. And that was when I learned the second important lesson about our board, which is it's a Silicon Valley board. And this was not a reckless decision. This was a very measured decision to take a risk on something that, if it succeeded, was going to transform the museum. It was a real act of courage and leadership. And as it turns out, in about 14 months, in the worst economy in 80 years, we raised $8.3 million, not $6 million. And we went forward with this. And that was the third major lesson for me, which is that Silicon Valley had embraced the museum. It had embraced it from the beginning. It wanted this to happen. It understood that there were going to be tough times, but there was going to be a rebound. And when it rebounded, this was what should exist when it all was said and done. So this is what we built. And as Alan said, the next slide. There. This is our $20 million permanent exhibition. A lot of you have been there, so you know how
Ask how many people saw it.
extensive it is.
How many people saw that exhibit?
Well, if you haven't seen it, you should come. It's a lot of fun.
It's really an exceptional exhibit. I've seen it about 4 times.
And when we unveiled it, the week that we unveiled it, we didn't know if we could actually get anyone in the media to come and cover the opening of the museum, especially in Silicon Valley, because I knew that it was important to get USA Today and the New York Times and, you know, the big institutional papers who really validate you needed to come and see this. So the morning before the exhibition opened, we came up with something we called, well, first of all, we wanted to open the exhibit on a day that was all ones and zeros. So we opened it on the last day of the 21st century, where the date was all ones and zeros. It was January 11th of 2011. On January 10th, 2011, we had a morning that we called 11 for 11. And the 11 for 11 was 11 iconic people involved in the history of computing, getting ready to open the Computer History Museum a second time on January 11th, 2011. Ted Hoff was there, Don Knuth was there, Steve Wozniak was there. We lined up 11 of the greatest figures from Silicon Valley and other places and had a press conference. That morning may never happen again. And we had 47 reporters in the lobby of the museum, and Steve Wozniak did a personal tour for them that he called the 8 computers that changed my life. And everybody in the media was following him around like the Pied Piper. And it went over so well. We knew we had a really special morning, and then the very next day, when the exhibit opens, we're on page A6 of the New York Times. The New York Times just doesn't cover any museum opening as a news story. And USA Today had this fantastic review calling this the Valley's answer to the Smithsonian, which is about the best possible thing that could have happened. And so we've used that line ever since. And that was really when I think I learned the fourth important lesson, which is that the popular attention span, the cultural attention of the impact of computing on our lives is beginning to grow. It was true in 2011, and it's starting to get larger and larger and larger. And I felt that we not only could do something important for history, but we were writing kind of a cultural phenomenon. And I think that's only increasing. Being digital is very important, as Alan said. Certainly in my background, I feel like we've only begun to scratch the surface of what we can do digitally and on the internet. Our YouTube channel just crossed 5.1 million views. We've got 160 programs up there now. We've got 30,000 subscribers.
Your other 2 slides are following.
Okay, good. And let me just finish talking about this, and then we now are increasingly on public television and radio. Last night, when we had Marissa Meyer and Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg, we had PBS, we had C-SPAN, we had KQED radio, and we had 2 of the local television stations cover that. So
They record that and rebroadcast it?
yeah, they will. Yeah, we'll be on C-SPAN probably over the weekend. And then, the museum itself has just grown in such a happy and satisfying way. We get about 125,000 guests a year. If you look at the museum in terms of square footage, size of staff, size of budget, size of exhibit space, all of that, we're in over the 80th percentile of all museums, 17,000 museums in the country, and we're in the 80th percentile. The collection, as Len mentioned, is huge. The oral history program that we undertake now is very important. We're trying to collect the stories of these legends while we can still get to them. We do about 80 a year. Walter Isaacson's book called The Innovators was released this week. It's the history of computing from Ada Lovelace to the launch of the internet. Walter read 200 of our oral histories from our archive as part of his research for this book. So it really is performing a very important research function. And then you can see the other facts and figures. The thing I want to say a little bit more about is the amazing volunteers. We've got an amazing volunteer corps. The man who just corrected Len about whether that was the Sage or the Johnny-Ack is one of our best docents. So I think the volunteer and community spirit that's building the museum is really exceptionally important to us. So there's the story in a nutshell.